Greetings, everybody. My name is Tom Finkelpearl. I am the co-chair of the Mayor's Commission on Art, Monuments, and Markers. And I'm joined today by 4 other of our commissioners. This is the second of our public hearings. We did Queens last week, and we're doing, is it Manhattan tomorrow? Yes. Okay. So we're going to put up a list of, if your friends have heard about this and they want to come, that would be great. We got several more to go. I wanted to say that this is being broadcast on Facebook Live, if anybody, just so you know. That'll be recorded. We did have a CART transcription services for captioning. We're hoping that that person can still show up. That person was delayed. So we're hopefully going to have CART transcription for the second part of the hearing, but we're not going to have it right at the beginning of the hearing. But first I'd like to ask my co-commissioners to introduce themselves. They'll get an introduction. And then the format of today's activities will be that people get to testify. Everybody gets 3 minutes. They'll be seated over here in groups of 3, 3 minutes each. And I will call out the names of those who are about to testify. So Harriet, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I think this is on, right? You can hear me? Great. I'm Harriet St. I'm a professor of art history and museum studies at City College. I have written several books on public art and memorials, one that focuses exclusively on controversy. So I'm feeling not quite at home here, but at least as if I have a reason to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Calvelli. I'm the Executive Vice President for the Wildlife Conservation Society. I'm the chair of the Cultural Institutions Group, which is the organization for 33 cultural institutions that are on city land and city buildings. I'm also the vice chair of the National Italian American Foundation.
Good morning. My name is Jack Chen. I'm a historian and curator. I'm a co-founder of the Museum of Chinese in America. I taught at Queens College, and I now teach at York University. I'm very concerned about the histories in New York City, especially of communities who have been not recognized or under-recognized, or in some ways disappeared. And I see monuments and plaques and all that as part of that kind of broad set of questions that I'm looking at.
Morning, my name is Justin Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the New York City Public Design Commission, which is the part of the New York City government that since 1898 has been responsible for the review of our public spaces and public buildings, and that includes public art and monuments on city-owned property. My background is in architecture, urban planning, and urban design, and so our work is really looking toward the design and stewardship of public space.
Okay. I'm sorry, there's one more commission member who's here who we'd like to seat. And so I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, and then I'm going to
My name is Audra Simpson. I'm professor of anthropology at Columbia University. I'm a social scientist, a scholar of indigenous studies and settler colonial relations, and I'm a Mohawk from Ganawagi, and we have a long and proud history in New York City.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to stand for this part of my presentation. So I'm going to give you a little introduction. Thank you so much for all of you for coming out. Beautiful to see you all here. I'm going to give a brief introduction of how we've been doing commission and what the commission is, and then we'll get on to the testimony. We're really here to hear from the public today. So this is our name, the Mayoral Commission on City Art, Monuments, and Markers. The first thing to say is simply that the idea of controversy around public art is not a new thing, certainly in New York City. And I'll just give one example, which is that there was, and this is going in and out, there was a sculpture in front of City Hall that was commissioned around the turn of the century, ended up getting installed in 1922, and it was called Civic Virtue. You can see it standing there. The work of art, by the time, between the time it was commissioned and the time that it got put up, there was a lot of ferment in America about women's right to vote, etc., the suffragette movement. By the time it got put up, By some people in New York City, the work of art was seen to be insulting to women. You can see that the allegorical figure of virtue is a man standing, and at his feet, it's maybe hard to see, are three women representing vice. So this was quite controversial for many years. It ended up getting moved in the 1940s, I believe it was, to City Hall out in, Borough Hall out in Queens, where it remained controversial for a long period of time, finally being moved here back to Brooklyn, where it is at Greenwood Cemetery now. So I just wanted to say, it might seem like a new idea, but as Harriet Senni and other scholars of this could say that there's been controversies around monuments, at least for the last century and many centuries before that, we believe. Okay. This has a delay. Okay, sorry about that. So the other thing to say is, of course, that this kind of controversy is something that's going around in many different parts of the United States. There are controversies, obviously, people have heard about what happened in Charlottesville around Confederate monuments. There's a big controversy you can see on the slide on the right there around the depiction of a mayor of Philadelphia, former Mayor Rizzo, which stands in front of City Hall. So I just want to say that this kind of controversy, this kind of discussion around monuments and markers is something that's happening all across the United States, certainly right now. New York City is not alone. So we were then charged by the mayor to come up with some policies. The Mayoral Commission on Art, Monuments, and Markers will advise the mayor on issues surrounding public art and historic monuments and markers on city-owned property. So it's very important to say we're not talking about street names, we're not talking about school names, we're talking about monuments and markers and only on city property. So if there's some areas of New York City that are actual federal property, that wouldn't be something we'd be talking about in this commission. And by the end of the year, the commission will propose non-binding guidelines. So this is an advisory group. We'll give some idea about guidelines to advise how the city should address monuments seen as inconsistent with the values of New York City. That was the charge to this commission. Why is this not advancing? Okay, here we go. Sorry. We'll have it manually advanced. Just to say what a monument and a marker is. The monument there on the left is a monument to Joan of Arc. And the marker on the right is just a name. It's a marker in honor of a well-respected educator in Queens. They named the park after him. And so this is what we're talking about when we say monuments and markers. Next slide. Just to be very clear, we are this commission. This commission, step one, will make some recommendations that will then be, essentially sent over to City Hall and become recommendations. It'll be made into mayoral policy. And then if there's a work of art or monument that needs to be addressed, there would instructions to the agency. So let's say it's in the park property, be instructions from City Hall or from the administration. The agency makes a recommendation, and then this is quite important. It would still go through the regular process that's been in place for a very long period of time, which is to go to the community board for review and also then go in front of the Public Design Commission. So Public Design Commission, which is led by Justin Moore over here, is a commission that was put in place in the late 19th century, and it has representatives from cultural organizations, the library, artists, architects, etc. And they have the charter-mandated final say on whether something would be, if a new work of art is being added or if a work of art is being moved or replaced. Okay, so right now across America, there are many jurisdictions who are going through exactly this discussion. And this is just a map of some of those jurisdictions. We've been in touch with people in different cities to talk about the kind of policies that they've put in place or that they're considering. So in fact, there are many cities that have exactly this kind of sort of outside expert advisory panel to advise the city on policy. So we're not alone. We wanted to show you some of the in terms of the discussions that have been going on And we have had internal discussions. Again, this is the second of our 5 external discussions to listen to New York City. So words that have come up again and again in our discussions are things like historical accuracy. How do you know the history of a particular monument? Participation, what is the participatory history of that particular monument? Who got to decide? And then inquiry into power, like who had the power to put a particular monument or marker in place? Complexity, it's important to remain, to understand the complexity of the history of New York City and the complexity of the history of any individual monument. And possibility, so while the charge to the commission really had to do with the question of, let's say, images of hate or symbols of hate, there's also possibility which has to do with the future and commissioning new works which haven't been imagined yet to fill in, let's say, some of the blanks in terms of what's represented in public. Next slide, please. So here are some principles that we've been playing around with, which have come from the commission. And those principles, you can read it, but include inclusion, that New Yorkers should feel welcome in New York City, in public spaces, historical understanding, respect and commitment to in-depth and nuanced histories. We have historians on our panel who are very strong on that, as well as others. Complexity, as I mentioned before, the layered, evolving narratives that represent New York City's public spaces. And, as I said before, this idea of sort of reckoning with power, like who gets to put up monuments or has to say. Next slide, please. And then just to be clear, interventions, a lot of the discussion has been around simply taking stuff out or taking it down or putting stuff, or does it stay or does it go? And we simply wanted to say that there are other kinds of interventions, and we have just sort of some examples up here on the upper left. Our artist named Edgar Heap of Birds has gone to different parts of American cities and sort of said, I would like to remind you of the native folks who lived here and identify who that is. There is the idea of new monuments. There's a monument to Harriet Tubman up in Harlem, which was commissioned under the Percent for Art program. We have our Percent for Art director. So it could be a new monument, adding to the history. There could be temporary interventions, like this one on the upper right is a garbage truck covered with mirrors, and Mayoral Euclid's artist-in-residence at Sanitation Department has worked for years to figure out how to represent sanitation, represent the workers of New York City in public places. There can be institutions. There are institutions around America. You could say that the museum in Battery Park City, the Museum of Jewish Heritage, is a monument. It represents itself as a monument to represent the Holocaust. It's not a sculpture, but it's a different kind of monument. There are educational ideas. We've been talking to the Department of Education. And then this idea of public dialogue through temporary works of art. So the one in the lower right is a artist named Paul Ramirez-Jonas who encouraged people to talk in public and then put their words up in large letters. Next slide. So again, the hearing format, which we'll get to in a minute. We're really here to listen to you. Each speaker is going to have 3 minutes. That's going to be a timer. You'll see your time going down, and there's a big couple of beeps, and we'll ask you to wrap it up at that time. If you don't feel comfortable coming up to speak in public, or you don't have your thoughts together today, or you want to tell somebody else, we have an online survey. The online survey has already got a couple of thousand responses. It's at nyc.gov/monuments commission. Next slide. And just to be clear, I don't know how readable that is at the back of the room. We are at our second of 5 public meetings like this. So there are 3 more coming up. So we invite you to come to those. And that is it. Okay, so I'm going to sit down now, and we're going to call forth our first group. Hold on a second. So in our first panel, we're actually going to ask people to sit 3 at a time. Assemblymember A.M.W. Colton, Nancy Tong, and Ryan Lynch, if you could come forward to speak. start with Mr. Fulton and then go from there. Greetings.
I would like to say, first of all, that I do appreciate the credentials of this commission. I think that's a very good thing. I think they all have very solid credentials in terms of dealing with this matter. This is a very sensitive matter because I think what we're doing is we are dealing with not just cement monuments or pieces of cement. We're dealing with traditions and emotions. My community, not only the Italian-American community, but the Chinese-American community, the Russian-American community, the Pakistani community, the Bangladesh community, the Irish-American community are all part of my district. And they all feel very strongly that their traditions should not be under attack. And they feel that they are. Now, these things tend to become very political. I think that the work of the commission is not political. I think it has a very good intention. But I think that the way it is perceived sometimes can be a problem. And I think this commission can give guidelines which remove that fear. I strongly support continuing to have Columbus statues throughout New York City. There is nobody who has no flaws whatsoever. Everybody has some flaws, and we don't honor people and traditions because of their flaws. The Columbus statue was built with money raised by Italian Americans who were under oppression at that time in 1898. And this was their way of speaking up for a tradition which encourages young people to be part of the American dream. And I strongly support that, and I strongly urge the commission to do nothing that in any way causes doubt as to whether or not Columbus Italian-American tradition should continue. And I strongly oppose removing any Columbus statues. But even more than that, I oppose removing statues representing any community with their traditions and their cultural, models. We don't honor somebody because they are perfect. We honor them because of an accomplishment that they have made. So Columbus was an explorer. He showed great courage and determination and perseverance in doing something that took a lot of courage. And he is a model for people from another country traveling across the oceans, traveling across long distances to come to America and then to persevere in America and to get into the American dream. One of the proudest moments in my life was I was a Grand Marshal at the Brooklyn Italian-American Parade a few years ago. And I know, what that means to me. I know what that means to young people. And as a result of that, I strongly urge the commission to not remove Columbus, but not remove any group's traditional folklore persons, and to come up with guidelines that deal with basically not allowing removal of it. Art and history should not be rewritten, and where there's a tradition, it should remain. I have with me over 2,000 signatures, petitions basically against the removal of the Columbus statue, and I'd like to present them to the commission.
Thank you. We're asking actually the traditional hearing format if people refrain from applause, but this is, you can do this silently. We don't want to have. Okay. So thank you very much. The next speaker is Nancy Tong.
I am Nancy Tong, and I'm the Public Relations Director in the Assemblyman's Office, and I'm also the district leader, and I represent the community. And I support for not taking down the Columbus statue from all the people in the community. Like the assemblies that we have collected over 2,000 signatures. We've been to senior centers, and everyone is opposing it. Why do we need to take down their culture? This is their culture. They asked today, it is the Columbus Day, the Columbus statue that's being taken down. Then where else later on? This is like attacking it. They feel they are under attack. And as New Yorkers, we should not look for causes to attack any culture. We should respect traditions, and we should not divide people, but unite them. the Columbus tradition is misunderstood. It absolutely does not stand for hate. It is not a symbol of hate. It is, however, a symbol of overcoming oppression and discrimination. It is a symbol of hope for the Italian American immigrants. Italian Americans have come a long way since they arrived, but people don't realize that they still experience discrimination. For that reason, we should not forget that poor Italian immigrants pool all their money to build the Columbus statue in Columbus Circle. For our grandparents and parents, we should not stand for this scrutiny attack. I always fight for preserving diversity, cultures, and therefore preserving our community and equality of life for all. It shouldn't be discriminated for one culture, because if they start doing that, it will be for all other cultures. We should always preserve what the history was, because he was a hero at that time. And you don't come back so many hundred years later and say that he did something wrong. Nobody is perfect. Everybody at one point or another has flaws. I don't believe anyone say that they are perfect. So whatever they are saying that he has flaws from before, we should not dig into history and say that this is what we don't take, and because what you did was wrong, we have to take down the statue. This is not right.
Thank you. Ryan Lynch is our third speaker.
Good morning. My name is Ryan Lynch, and I'm the Policy Director for Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. I want to thank Co-Chairs Finkel-Pearl and Walker and the members of the Mayoral Advisory Commission on City Art Monuments and Markers. We're very happy to testify here today at the second hearing held by the Commission. We're thrilled to submit testimony to the Commission on how the City of New York should address monuments seen as oppressive and inconsistent with the values of New York City. The work being done is an important self-reflection upon our history and the scars of that history as we continue to work to become a more perfect union. There's been wide public outcry about the need to revisit existing monuments and honor individuals with checkered pasts, and it is an important conversation that must take place. At the same time, we must build up our communities to recognize the rich and diverse history of individuals that strove against all odds to improve the quality of life of countless New York City residents during a time when their efforts went largely unrecognized and subsequently were not honored by the decision makers that often did not look like or experience the same New York City as them. It was in this vein that in July of 2015, the Borough President wrote letters to the Department of Army and members of Congress calling for the immediate removal of names honoring those who fought to preserve slavery in America from Fort Hamilton and Bay Ridge. We still believe this is a worthy call in Fort Hamilton and throughout Brooklyn and New York City. In that very same letter, we called for the convening of a commission of historians and local leaders to identify other historical figures more befitting of recognition than those that took up arms against the United States of America. Today, we renew that call, but also expand upon its vision. The Borough President believes that there are more than enough historical figures and campaigns that work individually or collectively to build a Brooklyn and New York City that accommodates all and is reflective of our diverse history and community fabric. At the same time, New York City has more than enough venues to honor these individuals or movements. Imagine, for example, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Municipal Building in downtown Brooklyn, or the Lena Horne Fan Shell in Prospect Park, or perhaps the future art trolley in Sunset Park named in honor of slain NYPD Detective Wen-Jin Liu. The BP urges the Commission to go beyond its existing mandate and incorporate recommendations and guidelines to identify which existing or new monuments, markers, and/or statues could be renamed or built to honor the men and women of color, our LGBTQ+ brothers and sisters, and the immigrants that made New York City what it is today and what it will be tomorrow. Thank you for the opportunity to see the testimony today, and we look forward to the recommendations of the Commission.
Thank you. Please, again, no applause. We're just, if you want to applaud, do so silently. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much to the first panel. The next three will be Jessica Lappin, Jewel Cadet, and Sheila Jerami.
Well, good morning.
Yes, okay, Jessica, if you can start. Yes, go ahead, please do. Yes.
Good morning, Commissioner Michael and the other members of the committee. I'm Jessica Loudon, President of the Downtown Alliance.
Hold on 1 second. Can you hear in the back? Okay, can you please have the microphone closer to your speaking? Thank you.
Is that better?
There we go.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Good morning again. I'm Jessica Loudon, President of the Downtown Alliance. I have a letter, testimony that is being passed around, but I'm going to read excerpts of it and share what I hope will be some insight and recommendations as you are making your recommendations, particularly as it relates to sidewalk plaques that mark Lower Broadway along the route of New York City's ticker tape parades. We at the Downtown Alliance have a maintenance agreement with the city for the 206 plaques that have been installed, and we have been the primary entity dealing with inquiries and controversies about them since they were installed in 2004, following an Art Commission approved streetscape and design program that the PDC authorized in 2000. And I just want to say first, as you deliberate, we think there's a difference between public monuments that by their design and purpose were intentionally used as tools of oppression or to incite violence, and those whose intent was to report history or mark notable moments in time. There is, for example, ample evidence that monuments honoring Confederate generals that were raised throughout much of the South were done not with the intention of honoring fallen soldiers or marking important battles, but rather to specifically further ideals of white supremacy and rally citizens to resist integration and the expansion of civil rights. The plaques that mark the ticker tape parades that occurred in Lower Manhattan are notices of events that happened, not rallying cries for each and every individual that marched up Lower Broadway. They're not endorsements, but a public recounting of the 131 years of history and the birthplace of our nation, and a way to highlight the importance of this street in that history. And in their totality, they tell an interesting and complicated social and moral story. There were men who were given parades that no one should venerate, and that history rightly judges unsparingly. And by our estimate, there are at least 20 markers that one constituency or another, possibly more, would find deeply antagonistic, including brutal dictators, fascists, religious leaders, and others. In our view, because of that, to remove only one or a few would be tantamount to grooming history. We can't erase the moment anyone marched up Broadway, and I don't feel comfortable whitewashing history. And it would also risk opening a Pandora's box, as the Commissioner mentioned. Controversy is not a new idea. So our recommendation is that if the Commission thinks that we should remove some of the plaques, we strongly endorse the removal of all of the plaques. And I will skip to the end because I'm short on time. Because it's also very difficult. You can't really asterisk or put one or two words that describe some of these people into the sidewalk and explain the controversy. But to that end, before Charlottesville, before the mayor's tweet, we had already contracted with the Museum of the City of New York as a partner to deepen the materials we publish about the ticker tape parades and create a digital teaching guide that will live on our website. And I think that's an example of how technology can be used today to really explain what is a very complicated history in some of our city. And given the city's commitment to Wi-Fi, I think beacon technology, for example, is another way that we can provide a richer history. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jewel. Is it Cadet or Cadet? Cadet. Okay.
My name is Jewel Cadet, and I'm the program manager for Youth and Community Empowerment at the Center for Anti-Violence Education in Brooklyn. CAE is a nationally recognized leader in violence prevention and trauma-informed physical violence prevention programs. We have been serving communities across New York City for over 40 years. We work in schools, LGBTQ youth homeless shelters, community organizations, and places of worship. CAE's founders recognize the connection between strengthening the physical body to inspire personal empowerment and emboldening the voices of survivors of violence to combat racism, sexism, homophobia, and other social injustices. Our programs address systemic challenges and work towards racial and gender equity and social justice in a variety of ways. As a grassroots intersectional feminist and anti-racist organization, we are opposed to any monuments which commemorate individuals or groups who have perpetrated violence, especially against members of marginalized communities, including indigenous people, women, children, black people, and people of color. But I'm here today specifically to testify against the statue of J. Marion Sims, which stands across from the New York Academy of Medicine on 5th Avenue and East 103rd in Harlem. I'm also chapter chair of Black Youth Project 100, and on the afternoon of August 19th, myself and 3 other members took part in an action at the statue where mock blood was thrown on the vaginal region of our hospital gowns to show a gruesome visual of the atrocities committed by J. Marion Sims. J. Marion Sims is known as the father of modern gynecology. He rose to his place of success by operating on enslaved black women without anesthesia because he claimed they could not feel pain. One of these patients, Arnica Westcott, was just 14 years old. She went through 30 surgeries without anesthesia and without being able to give informed consent. His other patients included Betsy and Lucy, who were 18 years old. If Sims is the father of modern gynecology, every innovation of his was built upon the backs and bodies of these 3 black women. We understand the importance of reckoning with and recognizing our history. Statues should be built to honor the legacies of Annika, Betsy, and Lucy, and other women like them. As an anti-violence organization committed to serving survivors of gender-based violence, we call on Mayor de Blasio to remove the statue of J. Marion Sims. If we want to build a world without racism and acts of violence against women and girls, we cannot continue to normalize, let alone celebrate, someone who exploited black women's bodies for his own gain. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheila Jeremy, sorry. Thank you.
That's fine. I'm Sheila Jeremy. I'm an art historian with a particular interest in public art and monuments. I think 3 minutes is not enough time, but we'll see what I can say. First of all, I'm concerned about the removal of Lee and Jackson in the Hall of Fame for Great Americans on the Bronx Community College, which was removed without campus discussion. They were just taken down. It is a national landmark, and I don't know how that happened legally. I know they're in storage, and I know that they're most likely not coming back. So that's one concern of mine, is how could they have done that without going through some kind of process where the community, the public could have some comment as part of an ensemble to tell a story, and the story is now altered. Another thing that I'm concerned about with Columbus is a lot of discussion about Columbus Circle, but we have Emma Stebbins' Columbus statue right behind this building in front of the state courthouse. It was designed by a woman, a lesbian. It is her largest marble work. It has historical value just as an artwork. It was paid for by a private collector, so it's not the Italian community that funded this. It was meant for Central Park. I think it's in the wrong location. It should not be in front of a state Supreme Court. It's almost invisible. I think this is a major borough. We are known across the world. We need something to represent us, and it's not Christopher Columbus in this particular statue. I think it should be relocated to Central Park where it was designed to go.
Okay. Thank you. You're finished? Yes? Okay. So we thank you to the 3 of you. The next 3 are Marianne Nicosia, J.C. Coleman, and Jermaine Lewis. Okay, let's start with you want to start? And so we'll go this way. Or no, actually, the mic is up there. Why don't you start? And you, I'm sorry, you are? Marianne, okay, thank you very much. We'll go this way.
I'm just here to say that you Americans do not know that my Hispanic mother from Dominican Republic thinks that Christopher Columbus is a hero. But today, the world will know that my mother, Rosa Celeste Valerio Nicosia, thinks Christopher Columbus is a hero. I can only criticize the Columbus Citizens Foundation for not making Columbus Day a round holiday that includes the Hispanic community, because my mother told me herself that it took 18 years for Columbus to do his voyage, and it was Spain, Queen Isabella, and King Ferdinando that helped Columbus discover America. And my mom told me that Columbus and Queen Isabella had a certain chemistry that made it all work. So I am here to say that you Americans do not know that my Hispanic mother from Dominican Republic thinks that Christopher Columbus is a hero. And the reason why my mother is not here to speak for herself, because she is 78 years old and her health is not in good condition. But my mom could give you a great class lecture on Christopher Columbus. And my mom is no vapid North American Latina like me. She is the real thing, born and raised in Dominican Republic. So I can only criticize the Columbus Citizens Foundation for not making Columbus Day a round holiday that includes the Hispanic community. You just don't know what I get at home. My mother is Hispanic. She has a Spanish accent. She is, the most Hispanic woman that you can meet in the world, but yet Americans just don't know that, my mother thinks Christopher Columbus is a hero.
Thank you. Jermaine Lewis.
Good morning, my name is Jermaine Lewis and I'm a Brooklyn resident. I also support the removal of the statue of Jane Marion Sims, who performed cruel...
Can you speak up, sorry, just a little bit closer to the mic?
I'm sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
Sorry. Again, my name is Jermaine Lewis, I'm a Brooklyn resident, thank you. I also support the removal of the statue of Jane Marion Sims, who performed cruel surgical experiments on slaves. And I think that the statue should be replaced with a historically significant black woman. Thank you.
Okay, J.C. Hallman.
Hi, my name is J.C. Hallman, and I'm the author of a piece about the Sims statue for Harper's Magazine this month. And I'm going to tell a story about Sims that is not in the article, and which I think speaks to the larger monument question. After Sims operated on young slave women and became internationally famous, he went to Paris and he was asked to operate on a young countess. And the countess died 3 times on the table from chloroform poisoning. And when Sims wrote to his wife in the immediate aftermath of this event, this is what he said. The operation was begun at 10 o'clock. Everything went well, and in 50 minutes there was nothing left to do but to secure the sutures. Just then I noticed a very livid appearance of the tissues. I asked if all was right, was answered, yes, go on. But almost immediately Dr. Campbell said, stop a moment, let her head hang down. He ordered Nelaton to support the head and Johnston to raise her feet perpendicularly into the air while he supported the body and shoulders. And I, imagine poor me, standing like a very statue of sadness and sorrow, calling out mechanically every now and then, my dear Dr. Campbell, is there any hope of saving her? They held her in this inverted position for 20 minutes. It appeared to me to be useless, but at last she breathed and breathed again. 22 years later, when Sims died, this story was retold in eulogies that were the beginning of the commemoration of this man, and one of them read this way, an account of the same exact incident. Sims operated in the presence of many celebrated physicians, and when he was about to close the wound, she expired under the effects of shock and anesthesia, whereupon a bystander remarked, yes, Sims, your operation is successful, but your patient is dead. We could have done it as well as that. Sims had staked everything upon this, his first operation in France, and stung to the quick by the sarcasm of this skeptical Parisian, he dropped his knife and sprang upon the operating table, remarking, no, she shall not die. He seized her by the feet and swung her head downward until the anemic brain became supplied with blood. The patient drew a long breath and the countess lived. Now, Sims was an inveterate self-promoter. He bragged about his wealth and his fame. He lashed out at what he perceived to be his enemies. And he manipulated the press, all of which adds up to a very familiar portrait. But even he didn't lie about that particular incident. And what I would suggest to the Monument Commission is that when we think about monuments, we're not just thinking about the figures memorialized. We're thinking about the motives and the resources of those who erect those monuments rhetorically and literally in the wake of their death. I think that were I to make a recommendation to the committee, it would be to think of your task in terms of resources, that you have a chance to demand that resources be given to organizations like the Public Design Commission and the Parks Department to invest in the kind of historical research that can uncover when a figure has been memorialized for incomplete or simply false reasons. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to you three. The next are Amaya Jones, Henya Goldstein, and Javier Enriquez. So we have a class today with us, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And I think we have some folks from that classroom joining us here today. Okay. All right, let's start at this end. What is your name? I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Amaya, and I'm a student at Academy of Young Writers. I feel as the Christopher Columbus statue should be removed, as he is biased, and as I wrote down here, he did not find America actually, and he names Indians. He actually gave Native Americans the wrong name. He was actually heading to America to find Indian spices, but actually wanted to call them Indians. So I think we should remove that. I also agree with the fellow people that came up here about the sins. I agree that he should be taken down because it makes no sense that us Black women should have to suffer to look at his views every day to see that when he gets us very cool.
Thank you. Henya Goldstein? Yeah, please bring the mic close to your
Can you hear me?
voice.
Hi, my name is Kenya, and I'm a teacher at Academy of Young Writers. And, you know, growing up, I went to an all-girls school, and I was taught about Columbus in a very, glorified, he was this hero, and so on and so forth. And then once I went to college and learned more about history, it kind of boggled my mind that the way history is taught and the way when I passed that statue, people might found like, oh, there's Columbus, he's discovered our world. And I think this is not just about replacing monuments and taking them down, it's about education. And so I think that it's not just about let's take down some of these statues, it's about like working with organizations and seeing how we can maybe add something to the statue or replace it with some educational resources or some primary sources, some excerpts, so that people can learn like what's the other side to the story, whose side is not being represented. And I understand that with the Italian Americans, it was there as a sense of cultural pride, but at the same time, that's one side of the story. And what about all the culture, the Native American culture, which Columbus really impacted them immensely in a very negative way, started the slave trade, basically got rid of almost an entire civilization. And I think that I'm glad that you have this commission and you can hear our voices. And I specifically want us to be able to bring these conversations into communities that feel really strongly about keeping these monuments. And so how do we and I'm not saying that I have the answer, but the open dialogue, what if the killings take place, I think that we have to acknowledge the multiple sides to history. And I don't think removing a statue or replacing it is getting rid of history. That's just actually showing the different perspectives, and something my students know, and I'm always looking at the other side. And if someone can convince me to keep Columbus statue up, I'm open to hear it, but as of yet, I don't understand, unless you put some memorialization of the people who, Native Americans who were the victims to that. I don't understand why we would celebrate one member and not think about the millions of others whose lives were lost. And in addition, one other thing, Andrew Jackson, I was shocked to find out that there were statues for him, because given his opposition to the abolition movement and what he did to Native Americans at the Trail of Tears, it's just very eye-opening. And again, my whole mission is education, so if we can have these conversations, have them with your children, have them, in your communities, then that will be a starting point for us to heal.
Thank you. Javier Enriquez.
Chicos, go. My name is Javier Tlaloc Enriquez. I'm head of Humane Civic Services. I'm born and still live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. My master's thesis at Boricua College on the psychological implications regarding overly excessive imposition from non-representative icons which exclude an entire people. I believe one of your principles is inclusion, correct? So with regard to this, my I felt excluded for a long time in this country, just as young lady and the teacher has mentioned as well. So with regard to the Columbus or whatnot, having grown up and been educated here in the United States, having long been told that Columbus is the great discoverer of America, with some mentions of people such as Amerigo Vespucci. One also grows up on the streets and places after Christopher Columbus. Even the name of the country my mother is from is called Columbia. The view from a broader sense is that as a person of color growing up in the United States, we're often surrounded by white icons from educational institutions. Columbia University and my John Wayne Elementary School, PS 380, to movies and television, to churches and the various statues around the city, statues in Central Park of Columbus, and Dr. J. Marion Sims, who experimented on slave women. So with regard to indigenous, let us be clear on those not only being of the domestic United States, but throughout here, this hemisphere, we call Hispanic, based on Richard Nixon's definition, the president. So with regards to the Museum of the American Indian, it's getting reduced, of course. Of course, that's federal land, of course, as you mentioned, but it lost its library where I developed one of my papers with regards to Benjamin Franklin. Let us also recognize that this coat of arms have symbolic recognition of the indigenous people, not icons as we should have, but just symbolic. The coat of arms on the flag of New York State. And with regard, there are so many Italian Americans who do not recognize Christopher Columbus. We must recognize it as well. So it does not represent an entire culture in itself. My great friend Robert Cangiano, he was adopted and raised by an Italian who was against this as well. And with regards to great Italian Americans, let us recognize John F. Kennedy, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. John Fitzgerald Kennedy wrote in the preface of William Brodor's 1960 American Heritage Book of Indians, the League of the Iroquois from this state, inspired Benjamin Franklin to copy it in its planning of the Federation of States. Let me mention one more last thing with regards to Columbus. He would kill indigenous people in the dozens in honor of the 12 apostles of Jesus, in the dozens, not just kill them. He would boil them in pots. Let me repeat that. He would kill indigenous people in the dozens in honor of the 12 apostles of Jesus. So we keep saying he is not perfect. He is extremely far from perfect. He's evil. That's it. He's an evil man. If you want to be proud of that, go on and pursue. Let us progress and regress like Los Angeles has done in other great cities. Let us progress and not regress. Thank you. La Sukamati.
Okay, thank you. We have the next three is Diane Stillman, Steve Zambundo, and Jennifer Wingwood. Okay, yeah, okay. All right. Sometimes people get on the list who didn't actually want to testify, so we will add instead. I'm sorry, this is Hold on. Hey, is that Carm G. Rubin, if you could join as well. All right, let's go down with, is that Diane? We'll go down this way. Yeah, okay. Diane, and then I believe that's Steve, and then okay.
Good morning. My name is Diane Stillman. I'm a native of Brooklyn. I've been blessed with a good education. I'm an attorney, and in middle age, I became a high school English teacher. Now I'm retired. I'm teaching law to retired people, and I'm volunteering at a homeless shelter. Let me begin by stating that I'm not Italian, and I'm not a historian, but I love Columbus. I'm giving you an article I wrote in 1996 once I started teaching about what Columbus meant to me growing up. I also have another article, which was not published, about what happened in Charlottesville from an educator's point of view. I'm very worried about the thinking in our country of younger people. Now, I loved Columbus. I didn't know most of his flaws, but I loved him for what he represented to me. What I dislike in the discourse now is the uninformed opinions. It's not enough to be able to make up a slogan. If you're talking about history and monuments and everything being discussed, you have to know something. I'm not saying I do, but I have done 10 minutes of research on Robert E. Lee, 10 minutes on Columbus, and it was an eye-opener. Anyone who's going to make a decision about this has to do much more. Most of you on this commission are experts in some field. Okay. The pain that has surfaced in this area has to be addressed, but it doesn't mean that it has to be addressed by removing statues. Here's a question. Do you know that the statue at Columbus Circle, which I saw yesterday, of Columbus faces south towards the ocean in New York City? In Barcelona, there is a statue of Columbus very similar, which faces west towards the ocean. This is what he is about primarily: exploration, never giving up. Skilled. He was a skilled navigator. He started sailing at 10 on commercial vessels. Growing up, that's what he meant to me. Diligence. If I could just be persistent, I would accomplish something. For a younger student, that's what's appropriate to reveal. As a student gets older, more of the picture. Okay. I just want to say one thing in closing. For those of you in the audience who are young, I just want to say that here are the people who rejected his idea, his dream of sailing west. King of Portugal, royalty in Italy, King of England, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella twice. They refused him. He stayed in the court for 2 years, badgering them, and then they said, okay. So that's persistence. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Good morning. My name is Stephen Bamundo, and I am the chairman of the executive committee of the Colombian Lawyers Association of Brooklyn and Staten Island. Colombian Lawyers is a group of approximately 400 attorneys, judges, and elected officials, most of whom are of Italian-American descent. While it is not our goal to invite a public referendum on Columbus as a man living more than 500 years ago, we seek rather to express the importance of his symbolism to an ethnic group that has done nothing less than help make this city, state, and country great. We understand that all voices must be heard, and we welcome the opportunity to participate in any meaningful discussion on this very important matter. No person or group can or should rewrite the history of the last 500 years. The year 1492 is etched in the minds of all as the year that Columbus discovered the New World at a time when it took a person of great courage, skill, and perseverance to dare to sail into the unknown. Christopher Columbus dared, and by doing so, he opened the door to the Western Hemisphere. One could reasonably argue that Columbus was the first immigrant to arrive on the shores of the Americas, a land that over time became built on the backs of immigrants of all backgrounds. It would be imprudent to evaluate every historically significant event or person through the moral prism of today's culture, experience, and mores. Christopher Columbus was of Italian descent, and as such there is a significant cultural element very important to New York City, as well as its Italian-American citizens, which would be most seriously impacted by the anti-Columbus fervor. The recognition of the significance of Columbus to Italian-Americans and New Yorkers is in general emphasized by the fact that virtually every mayor, including the current occupant of Gracie Mansion, has marched in the parade in his honor. Greater than a discussion of his role in history, Columbus has become the embodiment of the Italian-American experience and the assimilation and successes of generations of Italians who immigrated from Italy to a land also unknown to them, eventually helping to build and defend the shores of our country. There can be no separation of the impact of Columbus on the New World without the interwoven link to Italian-American culture, its heritage, and most importantly, the American experience of its immigrants. After the tumultuous years following the mass immigration of Italians who suffered unconscionable bias, a statue honoring Columbus and his discovery of the New World was built with contributions from Italian Americans who sought to demonstrate their love and loyalty of our America. The statue sits prominently in Columbus Circle and is more a symbol of pride of Italian Americans in Italy's contribution to the creation of America than the individual achievements of the man himself. To remove, modify, or otherwise alter that statue and its iconic symbolism would be a clear and irreversible affront to the Italian American community in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you. Carm G. Rubin.
My name is Carrie Rubin. I'm an environmental activist and a futurist. History has always presented us with psychologically complex and morally ambiguous figures who are often embedded in the cultural context of their times. And there's an important lesson in this, because in what ways are we wearing the blinders of popular opinion and oversights in our own time? I would predict that future generations will look with great scrutiny upon all of us, excepting those that are strict vegans, for our tolerance of the factory farm system and the well-documented abuses that are going on there. This controversy over the statues creates an opportunity to educate, to attain a more mature perspective on history. And I would say that instead of taking down a statue of Columbus, what I would like to do and what I would propose would be to ring Columbus Circle with a series of portrait statues of the native chiefs that were encountered when American explorers came here, and tell part of their story, and call attention to the historical tension between these peoples. And I mean, this is part of the drama of history. This is what makes history so interesting. It's sort of like when we were children and we watched Saturday morning cartoons where there were very one-dimensional heroes and villains, and now we watch anime with like Hayao Miyazaki, where the appeal of it is that the characters are neither completely good nor completely evil, and that's the strength of his storytelling. So I would also encourage more that we add to the city's heritage. There are a lot of overlooked periods of history, say Lady Moody in Brooklyn, who founded an early utopian community in Gravesend and hosted Quakers at a time when this was controversial. Brooklyn was the birthplace of American animation, and I grew up in the neighborhood and you would never know it. There's a lot of history we call attention to. These topics themselves, probably few of us, including myself, are aware of the latest historical scholarship concerning many of these figures. It would be good to have a conference say on Columbus Day, exploring the history of this period, the issues it raised, how he was viewed in past times, how he's viewed today, and also calling attention to the history and mythology of the native peoples who lived here, maybe trying to restore the ceremonial year that they had. There's always room for more, and so I'd say use this as an opportunity to educate.
Thank you. So, Nadia, do we have another set? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to this group. Next we have Maya Dosh, Rosalind Tejada, and John Giaglione. I guess it is, I'm sorry for the pronunciation. Gaglione. Sorry. Okay. We'll start at this end and go this way. And you are Maya. Okay. Maya is first.
So my name is Maya Dash, and I'm here as both a Brooklynite and as an art historian who specializes in public monuments. And I'm here to testify that it is fine. It is fine to remove select monuments that no longer represent the ideals that we stand for as a city. And I'm saying this as my professional opinion as an art historian. There's lots of hyperbole right now about how removing monuments erases history or rewrites history, but monuments have never truly been about some sacred fidelity to one true history. They're always about the politics of the present, the moment in which they were created. The way that we remember our history, who we celebrate, is how we frame our identity now. So that said, I would like to encourage the committee to advocate for the removal of all 5 Christopher Columbus statues in New York City's parks, and for the removal of the J. Marion Sims statue, who Ms. Cadet introduced earlier, as these 2 figures no longer deserve to be put on pedestals, quite literally, in our communities. There are dozens of other Italian-American innovators who better represent us than Columbus, medical innovators that would better represent us than Sims, and the Lenape Nation has never been adequately represented in the land that was once theirs. Opponents of the removal often state that such monuments, while flawed, create dialogue. Yet the Sims statue proclaims, quote, "His brilliant achievement carried the fame of American surgery throughout the entire world." Okay. To the vast majority of New Yorkers who walk by this statue, this is the only information we have. Nothing about the fact that fundamental to his fame were his inhumane experiments on enslaved women without their consent. If a plaque is added to acknowledge these women, it does not fundamentally change the fact that Sims is depicted heroically, standing on a pedestal, hand on his chest, looking outward, flanked by medallions that celebrate him. A plaque next to this monument is insufficient. A substantial inversion is necessary. So please heed the call of East Harlem Preservation, the Black Youth Project 100, Councilwoman Mark DeVerito, and other activists to remove the Sims statue. I would also like to encourage the committee to recommend creating new opportunities for temporary artistic interventions in the city's other monuments, reimagining them anew for the present moment. Our public space has never been and will never be static, and this is a moment to redefine who we are as a city. So with that, I'd like to thank the members of the Mayoral Advisory Committee for taking this work very seriously, and I'd also like to encourage you to continue advocating outside of the bounds of the committee.
Oh, thank you. Rosalind Tejada.
Okay. My name is Rosalind Tejada. I'm a Dominican student at the Academy for Young Writers. I only can feel the pain that my mom must feel every time she has to pass Columbus Circle and just stare at his statue and think about all of the ancestors that we lost back then. I came here to look somebody in the eye and say this. Hundreds of years ago, Columbus reached what is now Dominican Republic, the place where my family and my ancestors come from. People that could be related to me, the natives, were massacred, and for what? So that a man who did discover a land they were in, or even the one nearby, he never reached America. could be celebrated and claimed a hero. For those stating that he's a symbol of Italian pride, forgive me when I say this, he is no man to represent it. Just because he's Italian, he isn't like you. I'm sure that many of the Italian Americans out here are kind-hearted and will never hurt a soul. Please take down the statue, and if that's too much, at least revise. Add the Native Americans who were lost. Wipe off the smudge on your name. You're only dragging down your pride. I believe taking down, keeping up, or even updating a statue depends on what the person has done. Christopher Columbus should not be up there. He is no hero. And sure, he did bring attention to the New World, and if he didn't, we would not be here. But if we put a statue up to honor that, we're also honoring all the pain he caused the natives. Other statues, James Marion Sims, shouldn't be up there either. All those women that he caused pain to, no anesthesia to cause all these painful surgeries, it's not fair. And sure, many of the other statues should remain up. I believe that. George Washington, his founding fathers, stayed up. And just because he is a slave owner to the day he died, it was respected back then if you had one. So I can see why he maybe own one, but it's still not fair. I'm sorry. I'd rather not celebrate a murderer because of a slightly good thing he did. And it was so horrible because of the effect it had on the natives, who should by now just be called Americans because they own the land. They're the natives. So if there's a Confederate statue honoring someone that hasn't done something horrible, then okay, keep it up. For once, we need to think about all the races, not just one at a time. We have to think about how it affects whites, blacks, natives, and etc. Don't think I stopped there because those are the ones that supposedly matter most. America shouldn't be the family that attends to one child, then wait for years to finally attend to the other. It should be the one that attends to everyone in the first place.
Thank you. John, you're next.
Thank you for this opportunity, and on behalf of Southwest Brooklyn, where I just recently ran for city council, I want to come and speak on behalf of the many people I met along the route, along the campaign, that want to know, where does it end? Where does New York City stop the pattern of rewriting history? Having just run, like I said, I can tell you there is a groundswell of support in Brooklyn, in Southwest Brooklyn, in Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights, Bath Beach, and Bensonhurst. Last month, in October, at the Columbus Day Parade, sponsored by the Federation of Italian Americans, who I see some here, there was an enormous turnout. The streets were lined with people, flags, people dressed up like Columbus, people carrying signs. The biggest crowd I've seen in the longest time, and I really believe that people still living here in Brooklyn, Italians still living here in Brooklyn, and there are a good number in that area and throughout, and people that have moved to Staten Island and moved to New Jersey came back in large numbers specifically to stand there along the route and cheer for Italian heritage and Italian celebration, to send a message to Mayor de Blasio and to this commission that Christopher Columbus is here. And this notion that this commission, the mayor punting this tough decision to a commission and not taking a leadership role in making this decision. Obviously, there was an election. He put this off till after the election. So the mayor has, again, taken a key issue that should not even be a focus here. We shouldn't even have these hearings. We should be having a commission not on statues in parks. We should be having a commission and a hearing on how many people sleep in the parks at night, how many homeless people are in the parks at night. It's freezing out there. It was freezing out there last night. How many people slept in the park last night? Christopher Columbus is a statue. We should be focused on people, and we should be focused on moving forward this city and ending this insanity. Again, where does it end? Do we start looking at every street that's been renamed? Do we look at every library that's been renamed, every school that's been renamed? Where does it end? That's my question to the commission. And I believe Councilman Ulrich took a very bold step. He has sponsors already to make legislation in the city council, where the city council would have to vote on any statue removal or monument removal, and I believe that is the way to go. But I do implore the mayor implore your commission to focus on issues that truly matter to this city, focus on how many people sleep in the parks at night homeless instead of what statues stand in the park at night. That does not affect anyone.
Thank you. Nadia, can I have that? Yes. Thank you very much. The next three are, Glenn Katabe, Margaret Blair, and Amy Warple. I'm sorry, you are Amy, and you are Glenn. Do we have Margaret Blair? Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you. So we'll start with Margaret. Do you want to go? We'll start in that.
Tradition, tradition, tradition. My name is Margaret Blair. I'm an educator. I'm an independent researcher, and I'm here today to just lend my voice to this wonderful discussion about monuments and markers in this city. I'm also a graduate of FIT, studied fine arts for a very long time. I've traveled independently to study monuments and markers, and I'm here today just to say what would make this city great is when we get the history right. That's where it ends, when we get it right. We are the monuments to those who made this country really great. Where are the monuments to the slaves, the chained, the enslaved people, I should say? Where are they? That's what I would like to know. The markets, my friend, it's the markets. That's what drove Columbus here. That's what opened up Europe. That's what made people come. They claimed and they cried, gold rush. That's why they came. They were here to make money. It's the market, my friend. It's the market.
Please, let's not.
The stock. The market. What drives the market? Stock. What was the stock? Africans, okay, who built brick by brick wonderful institutions. Maybe Harvard, maybe the city of New York, maybe a lot of the bricks and stones and the blood and the bones are buried under the city. Where are the monuments to them? It's the market, my friends. That's what Columbus was really after. He was paid to search for more gems, for more money. And how did this country become rich? It's the markets that drove every European to this place to search for more money. What gilded the streets of Europe, what gilded a lot of those streets were the spices and the gems and all the wonderful things that they have raped and have stolen from natives and people from other places. It's the market, my friends. That's what really made this place so great. Money. And it was done on the backs of African people. Where are their monuments? Where are those statues? Where are the Africans who have chains around their necks and those who have really suffered here to make this country great? They have paid the price. Where are their names? What are their names? I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that reflected. We want to talk about tradition. It's wonderful when you neglect how this country has been made so great. We want to sing that song, money, 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 money. We're tired of that song, right? Right? We all know the song. It's on our televisions. And we're, being represented by people who just worry about the money. Right? And it hurts other people. Thank you.
Please, no clapping. Gabriel, please. Thank you. Glenn, you're next.
That was great. My name is Glenn Kansal. I'm the founder and CEO of Movers and Shakers. Our job is to accurately rewrite the history that's depicted in the history books and to change how the museums depict the narratives of Black and Brown communities through the means of virtual reality, augmented reality, and the creative arts. My message here today is that false narratives are a cancer. The White Man's Burden was a poem that justified the colonization of quote-unquote savages. Pharaohology was a false science that justified the intellectual inferiority of blacks so that we can continue to be in submission. If you look further down the line, the movie Reefer Madness created public hysteria and perpetuated a false narrative that marijuana makes black men go crazy and rape white women. We feel the residual effects of these lies at the institutional and individual level. We've seen it in the disproportionate sentencing for crack and cocaine. We've seen it through the war on drugs that destroyed our community. And you see it today in the fact that 89% of the male inmates in Rikers are men of color. False narratives perpetuated. Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. Colin Kaepernick is a traitor to our country for protesting police brutality. Trayvon Martin wasn't a little angel. These false narratives put us in cages, endanger our lives, and intimidate us into submission when we fight for our rights. The Columbus discovery narrative is an objective lie. If you come up here defending the lie, you either A, did not do your homework, or number two, you truly do not care. And I hope to God, for the love of all black and brown people, that is the first one. Italians, you have every right to celebrate your heritage, but not at the expense of black and brown lives, especially when your rich culture has so much more to offer. So let us push back against this rhetoric, this false narrative that we're judging Columbus by 21st century standards, when the objective truth is that the same Spanish government that put him in power decided that he was too cruel and put him in jail. This is not a 21st century issue. This is objective morality that we're discussing here. If this were a statue of Hitler, it would be a no-brainer, but because Columbus started a movement that killed 80 to 100 million indigenous people overall in terms of European colonization and impacted 12 million black people, it's up for debate. It's pathetic that I have to come up to a room like this to justify my existence. It's pathetic this is up for a debate just because the mayor is considering some people's emotions over my survival. We are living on stolen land. Meanwhile, you have 60,000 Haitians who are going to get sent back to a country that's been raped by this country for kicking them out. So that's another conversation. But let's start with getting the history with Columbus right, so we can have more sympathetic immigration policy in the future.
Thank you. Amy Warble.
Hi, my name is Amy Warbell. I'm an associate professor of history of art at the Fashion Institute of Technology. And I wanted to start out by thanking you for your thoughtful consideration, the opportunity for public comment, and I very much appreciate the time that the distinguished members of this commission are putting into addressing these very important and sensitive issues. As an art historian, I've spent my career using monuments, paintings, sculptures, other works of visual culture to spark analysis and dialogue among my students. I specialize in American and African American history. And for those in my profession, we know that works of art or artifacts are starting places from which we can begin to give dimension to our very paradoxical history in the United States. And we build the kinds of critical thinking skills that are necessary to a functioning democracy by presenting different perspectives, different points of view, competing narratives, and giving students the skills to use their own critical thoughts to reach conclusions. And I think this hearing today is the best example of American democracy. All of us sitting, listening to each other, and then eventually there will be a vote. That's the way democracy works. We have an education system that hopefully is designed to produce citizens capable of these kinds of thoughtful conversations. So what I would like to suggest is that the highest good in all of your deliberations should be to keep these conversations going. If a plaque is removed, if markers change, if a sculpture's gone, then what? That may remove a surface irritants. We have big problems to work on in this country. The statue of J. Marion Sims, he's the tip of an iceberg of past history of injustices in medicine that continue into the present day in terms of inequitable access to health care, inequitable health outcomes. So whatever it is that you decide upon, I would urge you to think about the big picture and the what next. If this happens, then what next? How does the conversation keep going so that we continuously analyze our complex history in order to understand it, to understand its legacies, and to make the best possible decisions for improving as a nation in the future. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you. 2 more panels? Okay. So I think we have 6 more people, 2 more panels. Lily Dalke, Johnny Stevens, and Andrea Solstad. Yes. You are?
Lily.
Okay, so we're going to go Lily, and then, okay, Andrea, and then Johnny. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, good morning. My name is Lily Dalk. Thank you for receiving my testimony. I work as a midwife at the Brooklyn Birthing Center in Midwood, Brooklyn. As a midwife, I have become aware of the terrible maternal and neonatal outcomes in our country. We rank 44th in the world despite spending the most healthcare dollars compared to any other country in the world. In our country, those outcomes are disproportionately borne by Black people. Black infants die twice the rate of white babies. Black women die during pregnancy and childbirth 4 times the rate of white women. And in New York City, those outcomes are even worse. So in New York City, Black women actually die 12 times the rate of white women in our city, with the worst outcomes being in the Bronx and right here in Brooklyn. So how does this relate to statues? I'm here today to speak about the J. Marion St statue. I believe that statues are there to honor and uplift our values, and it sits with me as being deeply problematic that in a city where so many Black women and so many Black babies are dying, we are venerating a man who exploited the most vulnerable members of his community to advance his skills and his profession. The past is not past. In the hospitals around the city, Black women's bodies continue to be used for learning, for residents and for medical students. Black women disproportionately bear that burden of being learned upon, and they do not experience the benefits that come from that learning. So the advances that J. Marion St made in the field of gynecology has not translated into better outcomes for the women who made that learning possible. So what are our values as a city? If we have this maternal and neonatal mortality crisis, what are our values when we have a statue of a man who set in place, set in place the practices that we continue to see today? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Andrea?
Hi, my name is Andrea. I'm an artist. I can't hear anyone say Native New Yorker and not think of the massive natives killed 500 years ago, 500 days ago, this giant killing field that we all stand upon. When I brought the monument issue up in conversation with a friend, they said, why? It's just another dumb piece of art, you can ignore it. I said, no, it isn't. It's not just an artwork. Monuments are public figures seen by everyday people, every day, like professionals, laborers, families, parents, and children alike. How many people walk by these monuments every single day on their commute to work? How many people of color are reminded of colonial violence every single day on their commute to work? These aren't paintings or sculptures cloistered in some sort of like regal museum or one more elite white box gallery. Those spaces are all distinguished by doors, which you can choose to enter. Monuments are out in the public. I can't choose to not see a monument, no more than I can choose to not see a tree. Monuments represent core cultural values to visitors and passersby, and at the moment remind us in society the flaws so easily found in our own. a life considered so noble and exemplary as to be captured in bronze, is supposed to represent the best of what we have to offer. Are these role models the best we have to offer history and to each other? Clearly, those 500-strong everyday people who appear at the Museum of Natural History for a day of action on Columbus Day feel that that answer is no. They are insufficient. These monuments are simply not who we are as a public anymore, who we are as a city, and who we will become. A more tolerant, inclusive, diverse, and compassionate community whose actions mirror a hunger for and a commitment to justice. Integrity should not be confused with rigidity or a resistance to change, but in recognizing the necessity for change. While I commend the mayor for a well-appointed panel and thank all of you for your contributions, I'm interested in expanding dialogue to solicit and document the wealth of alternatives being volunteered from the public community at large, not just the most prolific from our arts, political, and academic sectors, but all New Yorkers, students, neighbors, and comrades. For anyone interested in participating, please find me afterwards, and thank you.
Thank you. Johnny Stevens.
Yes, I'm Johnny Stevens. I'm with an organization called Community Labor United for Postal Jobs and Services. I'm also a member of Home Care Providers, Local 2 UFT. I'm here to speak to the committee and to present to them a letter to them of a grouping of labor activists and community organizations who would like to speak to the effect of Italian workers and workers, native workers, who was a larger part of postal workers, steel workers, farm workers, First Nation workers who actually built this country. We are circulating a petition to really be a part of the struggle of stop glorifying Columbus. We want to raise the question of changing Indigenous Day, Columbus Day, to Indigenous People Day. We want to raise the question of removing the 5 Columbus statue, but also removing the statue of Teddy Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, with a slave and a native walking beside him, dressed in armor in front of the museum. There's another statue we feel that need to be removed. We also want to raise the question of Italian immigrant and workers, and raise that that Columbus Day parade be changed to Italian American Day parade instead of Columbus Day parade. Some of the people who was on this signers of labor organization is Chris Sevier, Secretary Treasurer of International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Local 808. Stephanie H. Cope, member, executive member, Committee of New York Typographical Union, CWA, 14156. Sarah Caronado, founding member of Parents to Improve School Transportation. Labor Against Racist Terror. We have Susan E. Davis, National Writers Union, UAW, 1981. Joe Hirsch, retired, National Mail Handlers Union. Diane Massowitz, host and producer of Labor Forum. Minnie Bruce Pratt, National Writers Union, UAW, 1981. Mike Fell, retired, New York State Union, Cooper Union. James D. Bucks, union teacher from Dustinhurst. Donna Lazarus, retired, UFT Local 2. Andre Powers, delegate of Baltimore, AFL-CIO, Central Labor Council. Finally, I would like to give a copy of this to the commission so that in the following events of these hearings, and when the day is decided for a final resolution of this, we would like to tally up all the petitions, labor organizations that we get, and present it to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is kind of the final call. We're going to do one more panel. If anybody is in the audience right now who wants to testify, what you need to do is go outside, sign up, and you still have a chance. But if not, I'm calling the last panel, which is Edward Moran, Jennifer Hadlock, and Juan Barquera. is Jennifer Havelock. Oh, there you go. Okay. And you are, sir, at the end? I'm sorry. Okay. You can go. Is it, and you are?
My name is Edward Moran.
Edward, you're first.
Thank you.
And then we'll go to Jennifer and then Juan.
My name is Edward Moran. I'm a poet and literary historian who represents a growing coalition of community and literary people who are interested in replacing many statues in New York City with those poets. In 1944, during the darkest days of World War II, Fort Greene's beloved poet Marianne Moore wrote In Distrust of Merits, a remarkable poem that still serves as a rebuke to today's corrosive civic dialogue both locally and nationally. An excerpt from the poem, somewhat less than 140 characters, could handily serve as a counterweight to the tweet storms that have sadly come to represent our official national discourse. Moore writes, "We vow we make this promise to the fighting. It's a promise we'll never hate black, white, red, yellow, Jew, Gentile, untouchable." In recent days, we have allowed our shared language to be hijacked by cruel and unusual politicians who are using words as a weapon to wreak cruelty and divisiveness in the land. Marianne Moore is one of a vast community of poets, living and dead, who offer a kindlier, gentler alternative. She deserves to be memorialized at Fort Greene Park, near where she lived and wrote for some 37 years. So too does Richard Wright, who composed parts of Native Son while sitting on a bench in the selfsame park. So too does Walt Whitman, the great poet of American democracy, who advocated for the creation of the park as editor of Broken Eagle. So too does Sojourner Truth, and so many others who spoke truth to power. The coalition of which I'm a member includes a growing number of members at Marianne Moore's own Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian Church in Fort Greene. We believe strongly that the voices of poets need to be foregrounded in our civic landscape. This includes especially the voices of women, the voices of people of color, the voices of the marginalized, the voices of the dispossessed. Let us tear down our monuments to military prowess, political cruelty, and exploitative exploration, replacing them with what Yeats called monuments of unaging intellect. I wonder what Marianne Moore would have thought of the situation in New York City today, where there are only 5 statues of women among the hundreds in our parks and public spaces. 7, if you include Alice in Wonderland and Mother Goose. Another Brooklyn-born poet, Chaim Plutzik, had Federico Garcia Lorca in mind when he wrote in 1950 of cities like Granada that had killed their poets. Plutzik believed that indifference to poetry was just as pernicious, fearing a future American society devoid of literature that represented, quote, the final distillate, the eternal stuff, pure and radiant as a drop of uranium. I call on New York City to lead this charge against indifference by populating its parks with poets, that in honoring their commitment to language, we may come to an ever more profound sense of our shared values as a diverse and compassionate community. Thank you.
Please, no clapping. Sorry. Jennifer Havelock.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Havelock. I'm thankful to have a chance to speak today. I believe that we need to go through a process of healing to undo racism and white supremacy that is the foundation of the founding of this country. And part of that is to be truthful about our history. Columbus was only revered after the Revolutionary War because the founders wanted to separate from the British and have a different story of our founding than the Mayflower and Jamestown. He never even stepped on the mainland that is now the United States. He tortured and enslaved indigenous people. Being anti-Columbus does not mean that you're anti-Italian. J. Marion Sims' statue in Central Park honors a man who experimented on enslaved black women to learn about medicine, supposedly. The New York City claims to be a progressive and progressive place. And how are we different than the Confederate statues in the South? The current status of history has whitewashed and celebrates racism, and we need to change this.
This is an opportunity to make those changes, and this commission has the power to do that. Please don't squander it.
Thank you. And Juan Barquero.
Good morning, thank you.
Can you speak closer? I'm sorry.
Well, my name is Juan Barquero. I am a young citizen, naturally born, raised in this land that had no border less than 400 years ago. And although I've been born here, I'm still treated as a second-class citizen. Seriously. And in my motherland, I am considered mestizo. So I am Indian with European blood. So I'm here to tell you that we all know that the people in Europe came here because they were being oppressed. Politically, religiously, and they had diseases too. They were fleeing away from contamination. They were contaminating their own water. Now here, their own children are contaminating the air. That's crazy. And I'm also here to tell you that there were 500 nations here, 500 natives that actually welcomed the European settlers. They welcomed them. They gave them their hand. They fed them. They educated them. They actually taught them how to survive the harsh winter. And how did the Europeans pay them? We basically put up a statue of a terrorist, of the terrorist of this land. If you're going to have a statue of a terrorist of this land, you might as well have a statue of Osama bin Laden. Seriously. Because he's a terrorist of this land, right? So I'm just telling you, take down that statue. It doesn't belong in this land. That's it. That's my case.
Thank you. And there's one more group of three who have just signed up, which is Tracy Phoenix, Jackson Rockingster, and Cheryl Dupree, or Dupris. Okay, we'll start at this end of the table, and your name is?
Hi, I'm Tracy Phoenix, and I was originally born and raised in El Paso, Texas. I grew up in the borderlands, literally 1 mile away from the border wall. I am here I work here in Brooklyn with Obliterated Grass, which is a socially engaged organization, and I'm also Innovative Cultural Advocacy Fellow at the Caribbean Cultural Center of African Diaspora Institute. And there are various ways to really dissect these arguments about monuments and markers, and I kind of want to get into a personal narrative about this. Growing up in Texas as a Chicana Native Texan with indigenous roots, there is barely minimal markers that commemorate Chicana Native indigenous peoples there. And just to think about my experience growing up with the border as a massive monument, it does incite violence to immigrant peoples, and that can be, that really changes the everyday interactions that people of color experience, from microaggressions down to psychological impacts that really make everyday living a struggle. And I think, I also went to the University of Texas at Austin, where a lot of my colleagues we experience violence on an everyday basis from racism, and then these white monuments they produce a false narrative that doesn't necessarily convey the strengths of people of color, indigenous, queer and trans people. And I think we really need to uphold these diverse narratives that reflect the values of our cultural leaders of color and really bring that to the public face and to the public community and honor those experiences that will protect people of color within our communities. That way we can feel protected and not have to experience violence on an everyday basis. So I just want to kind of really think about what cultural markers will reflect these inclusive values. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you. Cheryl, Chris.
Hi. I decided to make a comment here because I was listening to everyone speak. I am from South Dakota originally. I'm a full-blooded Native American. I come from the Sioux Nation. My tribe is Minnekojo, who house great leaders that have won battles in the West. I want you to remember one thing, that this is your community, and I'm not here to change your community. I'm here to participate. But I wouldn't want you to come into my community and make changes to my statues, to my monuments, to my legacy, how we see fit. Regardless of what has happened in the past, we can't change it. But we can move forward. I don't want anyone to change any statues. That's my opinion. And I don't want anyone coming in and saying, change your parade name to represent me. This is not fair. I want you to caution those who represent Native Americans in this cause to remove statues, because they do not speak for everyone. Trust me, they do not speak for everyone. This is your community. I love the statues because I can walk by and remember that man who did what he did in the past, and I can educate my visitors and my friends. Otherwise, I may forget. How many natives actually came forth to create a statue? You have never had a committee that came to create a statue in their remembrance. You have never had a community of natives to say, I'm going to have my own parade. And this is unfortunate because the leadership in our community is vast. We have over 5,000 tribes, which means 5,000 different views on our history and our culture. I will not impose on the Mohawk my culture for them to represent, as I do not want them to impose on my culture to represent them. The Lenape are people that you don't even know about. You talk to children, they don't know who these people are. And yet, you have other issues going on with names that represent Native Americans throughout your city and state. This issue with requesting on behalf of Native Americans, trust me, they are not speaking on our behalf. The leadership is lacking in my community to go forward and make a positive change. My only request would be out of this is that you educate your education system to make the change, so that when that child walks by that statue, they know what it means.
Thank you. Our last speaker will be Jackson Rockland.
Thank you. Good morning, panel. I happen to be the president of the Haitian American Business Network Chamber of Commerce, that's Hamnet Chamber of Commerce. I'm also the vice chair of the Flatbush Junction Business Improvement District, and I'm an adjunct professor at NCNY. I'm here today not to ask to remove a statue, but to erect one. Just to share with you a little history between Haiti and the United States. In the 19th century, around the turn of the 19th century, there was a man called Toussaint Louverture. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with that name. He's marginalized. The history of our people is marginalized. But what he did had a tremendous impact, not only in Haiti, not only on Latin America, but also this country. Remember at that time, Napoleon Bonaparte wanted to conquer the world. He wanted to conquer Europe. He wanted to conquer the Americas. However, his army was promptly defeated in Haiti. Haiti, the Pearl of the Antilles. Once that happened, he gave up all dreams of conquering the Americas. Had it not been for Toussaint Louverture and Haiti winning that war against the French, it's very possible that we would have remained the 13 original colonies and possibly speaking French. So we need to recognize that. The last thing I want to say is, please, honor this history. In Flatbush today, we have the largest number of stakeholders of Haitian ancestry. The business owners, the churches, religious leaders, the homeowners. I would like for them to be recognized. I would like the legacy and the history to be recognized and celebrated by all of us by erecting a statue, particularly in the Flatbush section of Brooklyn. There's a lot more I can say about Toussaint Louverture's accomplishment, but I think I will stop right there, and I thank you so much for this opportunity.
Okay, so I think that is concluding the public testimony. I want to really thank everybody for your thoughtful testimony today, and we're going on to Manhattan, yes, as our next stop. Again, if you have friends or if you want to, weigh in online, we have, is the address up there? Yeah, nyc.gov/monumentscommission. We are looking for all of your input. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming.